So I'm going to introduce now Philippa Campbell, who is a PhD candidate at Goldsmiths College, University of London. Her research focuses on innovations within the genre of contemporary campus fiction and their relationship to the current upheaval within the HE sector. She's presented papers on Donna Tartt's Secret History, changing role of professors in British and American fiction, and the historical relationship between the American campus novel and the university. Her most recent publication highlighted the potential for a Marxist analysis of campus fantasy fiction and broader implications for the fantasy genre. And you can see the title up there. Welcome, Philippa. Thanks very much.
Hi, thank you. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Yes, okay, good, thank you. So I'm a little bit scared to be presenting after Bob's talk because I hope I don't exemplify the poor method of literary interpretation that he was discussing. But I'm very happy today to be presenting 3 sections from different chapters of my PhD research, which is focusing on campus fiction. And these are contemporary campus fiction, and these are novels which feature university students as protagonists. So today I'm going to be talking about 3 texts, 2 I think which are some of the most well-known of the genre, Bret Easton Ellis's The Rules of Attraction and Donna Tartt's The Secret History. In my final section I'll talk about Joyce Carol Oates's I'll Take You There. And these contemporary novels are very different from the origins of the genre. Beginning in the end of the 19th century, the original forms of the campus genre were very much similar to the public school novel. So these were, in a sense, manuals for citizenship and depicted elite students receiving education and being socialized in universities and then leaving university to contribute to their communities. These novels especially featured fighting in the Civil War as an example of the contribution, the national contribution of university students. But the central premise of my research is that contemporary campus novels essentially depict the failure of mass higher education. And I'd like to support that premise today by showing how these novels undermine the elite values which university students are said to symbolize, and also how the university perpetuates broader structures of inequality, of exclusion. So I'm going to talk about the experience of Camilla in The Secret History and hopefully show how the novel replicates patriarchal and misogynistic practices. And then in the final section, I'll talk about the experience of an African-American student in Joyce Carol Oates's novel and show how the narrative replicates mechanics of racial exclusion. So I'll be particularly focusing on some literary devices today, the narrative devices of The Rules of Attraction and I'll Take You There, and a particular form of characterization in The Secret History. So to talk about Bret Easton Ellis's work first, his work as part of the literary Brat Pack of the 1980s, Ellis's work has come to exemplify and symbolize youth culture of the period. He's particularly well known for his, the violence in his novel American Psycho. But in The Rules of Attraction, it's the university which is a microcosm of contemporary hedonism. And this hedonism is personified by the wealthy students at Camden College. The students spend all their time drinking, taking drugs, and having sex. And this instability and worthlessness, essentially, is emphasized by the novel's narrative device. The novel is told through a number of shifting first-person internal monologues. And there's a number of narrators in the novel, but these 3, Paul, Sean, and Lauren, are the central characters who narrate most often. So in Ellis's novel, there's a number of linguistic devices which creates a world which is devoid of meaning, undermining the elite values of the university. So the novel creates a feeling of temporal defamiliarization. It moves from the past tense to the present tense, and some of the novel is told in a rapid series of past participles. And in addition, some sections are transcribed as drama rather than prose, and one chapter is narrated in French in the English language novel. So these linguistic techniques contribute to the fragmented nature of the novel, and this resists consistent narrative position, form, and language. This fragmentation rejects the possibility of profound reflection upon the character's thoughts and behavior. And as well as preventing the reader's engagement, Ellis's novel rejects the possibility for progress, undermining the educational function of the college. The novel is divided seemingly arbitrarily into episodic segments which frequently overlap, so there's no chronological development throughout the work. This results in a sense of stasis, which is reinforced by Ellis's use of repetition in the novel. So the characters attend several costume parties, they attend regular film screenings, and they even repeat the same phrase over and over again. Martin Weinrich has noted this function of repetition in American Psycho. So we can see that Ellis turns the function of repetition, which usually is a device of making sense, against itself in order to create a form of repetition that ultimately spirals into meaninglessness. All of these linguistic devices together characterize the university as a space which prevents deep engagement and reflection, which we, I think, hope is characteristic of academic study. Rather, Ellis's novel creates a world of uncertainty and instability in which the university students reside. So the students' individual isolation within this uncertain world prevents their contribution to wider society, which is fundamental to earlier forms of the campus genre. In a seminal work of narrative analysis, Gérard Genette defined the significance of the internal monologue, which is used in Ellis's work. He said, the very principle of this narrative mode implies in all strictness that the focal character never be described or even referred to from the outside, and that his thoughts or perceptions never be analysed objectively by the narrator. So what Genette argues here is that internal monologue maintains the integrity of the person from whose perspective we are viewing the world. This person is never critiqued, and their interpretations are never challenged. However, Ellis's novel subverts Genette's discussion. So rather than rejecting the critique of characters, Ellis's narrative structure insistently describes characters' actions from various perspectives. Furthermore, narrators, the individual student narrators, regularly misname other characters and misinterpret events. So the reader is left to infer the identities and the events of the narrative. This external definition is evident when relationships are formed between narrators. So Paul attempts to interpret Sean's behaviour during their relationship, and later Sean attempts the same understanding of Lauren. But during these sections, there are fewer chapters narrated by Sean and Lauren, the of the interpretation, as it were. So these narratives undermine the potential for individual subjectivity and integrity. Sean and Lauren's absences during their relationships signifies their entrapment within the narratives of their romantic partners, until Lauren is metaphorically silenced in a blank segment of the text bearing her name. So early forms of the campus novel upheld elite authority and established cultural values, and depicted students leaving university to contribute to their community. However, in the rules of attraction, the elite students are shallow, and the educations exemplify the meaningless of their lives. Furthermore, the students are trapped within the narratives, preventing their contribution to wider society. This is one novel of many which undermines the elite values of a university education. And I'd like to move on to discuss the depiction of one female student, Camilla in The Secret History, show how this novel recreates or aligns the secret history with a particularly patriarchal literary tradition. So I hope some of you may be familiar with this text. The Secret History was a bestseller and very popular during its publication, or at the time of its publication, and since. I often see it on top 10 lists. And it's the story of 6 classics students at a university in Vermont. The book is narrated by Richard Papin, who arrives at the college and becomes engaged with the lives of 5 other students: Henry, Francis, Bunny, and the twins Charles and Camilla. The students all study the classics, and these principles lead them to attempt a bacchanal, which results in the murder of a farmer. And I'd like to talk about Camilla in particular in this novel. When Richard first sees Charles and Camilla, he describes them as, quote, a couple of angels. With their pale clothes and refined features, they are, quote, like figures from an allegory or dead celebrants from some forgotten garden party. Camilla particularly entrances Richard. She becomes a divine figure who, sitting in a shaft of sunlight in Greek class, quote, was illuminated until it was a to look at her. Even from Richard's first thoughts about Camilla, there's a duality at the heart of her character. She's beautiful, ethereal, and magical, and yet there are also undertones of violence and death. In Richard's first class, she performs as Clytemnestra, wife and murderer of Agamemnon. After the class discussion, Richard realizes that it is error. Indeed, Camilla is no benign figure. She is the one that is found covered in blood following the murderous bacchanal. Her hair is, quote, dark and clotted, completely soaked, as if she'd tried to dye it red. And towards the end of the novel, Richard realizes that Camilla is engaged in an incestuous relationship with her brother Charles. So Camilla's narrative function in The Secret History is that of the demonic woman. And this is a trope which is common in Western culture, from the Bible to Greek tragedy, throughout the English literary canon. As I'm sure some of you are aware, or most of you are aware. And this tradition has been prominently highlighted by Sandra Gilbert and Susan Goober in their work, The Mad Woman in the Attic. Like Camilla, the demonic woman is detached from reality. And these horrifying figures often, quote, entrap and destroy men, while they also evoke feelings of, quote, sexual nausea in male protagonists and, assumedly, readers. The demonic woman's escape from domesticity challenges patriarchal dominance in the social and literary sphere. So this is from Gilbert and Goober. The monster woman embodies intransigent female autonomy and thus represents both the author's power to allay his anxieties by calling their source bad names, and simultaneously the mysterious power of the character who refuses to stay in her textually ordained place, and thus generates a story that gets away from its author. And indeed, Camilla presents a particular problem for Richard. She is enigmatic, and he realizes at the end of the text that she is an expert actress. Camilla attempts to assert her independence from her brother when she begins a relationship with another student in the novel, Henry, but this incites an awful jealousy in Charles and tears the group apart. As Gilbert and Goober identify in Camilla's literary precursors, her rebellion is ultimately denied. At the end of the novel, Camilla is returned to the silencing enclosure of the domestic sphere, caring for her aunt. Significantly, she, quote, can't remember the last time she read a book. And her detachment from literary authority and education is complete. The appearance of the monstrous female figure in contemporary campus novels emphasizes the university as a site of patriarchal control, which rejects the potential for female self-ownership and education. The female monster is a manifestation of rebellious female authority. In this novel, the university is a patriarchal institution where female empowerment is subversive. Similarly, the female monster challenges the university's ability to educate women. Gilbert and Goober highlight that the female monster symbolizes, quote, the dangerous effect of misdirected and undigested learning. This novel depicts educated women as a menace, challenging male authority. Just as this literary device replicates a mechanic of patriarchal control, we can see similarly exclusionary mechanics of white supremacy in descriptions of Verna Mathias, a Black PhD student, in Joyce Carol Oates' novel, I'll Take You There. So this novel was published by Oates in 2002 and is said to be she has said it was her most autobiographical. According to the novel's description, I'll Take You There is, quote, an astonishingly intimate and unsparing self-portrait of a young woman who comes of age in the 60s. Once again, I'd like to focus on the narrative device of this work, which is told from the first-person perspective of an anonymous narrator, a white female narrator, who wins a scholarship to university. And in the second section of the novel, she begins a relationship with Verna Mathias, who is a PhD student at university. I think I have this here. This is quite a long quote, but this is Verna's first appearance in the novel. I'll just give you a minute to read this yourself to save my throat. So this is Verna's first appearance in the novel, and this is the entire chapter. So we've got a single page-long sentence with 23 clauses dedicated to vocal description. And Verna's introduction here exemplifies a number of socially constructed stereotypes of Black people. The philosopher George Yancey has noted that among other stereotypes, quote, Blackness signifies criminality, inferiority, danger, evil, predation, and hypersexuality. And a number of these stereotypes can be seen in this passage. So Verna's voice is, quote, cajoling and seductive, low and throaty. His voice is a voice of yearning. And the violence of his voice is like the bared teeth of an attack dog. Cruel as a knife blade and of rage, alludes to the criminality Yancey identifies. While Verna's voice is also manipulative, a voice of irony, sinewy and sly. The stereotypes illustrated here are frequently repeated. It's difficult to find a page in this section of the novel which does not deploy one or all of the stereotypes that Yancey has described. These characteristics are communicated through the narrator's words, and it is through her eyes that the novel is told. This white gaze, too, is a tool of oppression. After becoming aware of Werner in class, the narrator begins stalking him. She is, quote, a prowler, visiting Werner's apartment and sometimes passing it more than twice a day. She walks, quote, swiftly and guiltily, eyes averted from the objects of her interest. However, as the narrator becomes more emboldened, her gaze becomes more direct. In the ethics class, she moves to seats, quote, where she could turn her head and look at him. She contemplated that face, which is beautiful to her, and yet to another's eye, ugly. Werner is defined and characterized by the narrator's white gaze, illustrating Frantz Fanon's famous discussion of overdetermination from without. So in Black Skin, White Masks, he's discussed this process. He says, I am being dissected under the white eyes, the only real eyes. I am fixed. Having adjusted their microtomes, they objectively cut away slices of my reality. I am laid bare. I feel, I see in those white faces that it is not a new man who has come in, but a new kind of man, a new genus. Here, Fanon highlights the experience of the white gaze and the construction of an individual's subjectivity. Surveyed by the narrator's white eyes, Werner is fixed, externally defined, and a new kind of man is created, a man defined by the historically and socially defined stereotypes attached to the color of his skin. So we can see here how this novel's narrative device aligns the university with mechanics of white supremacy discussed by Frantz Fanon, and denies the personal development and individual subjectivity which the university should encourage and which was so fundamental to the origins of the genre. So just to finish, I'd like to contextualize these mechanics within broader conversations regarding this higher education today. The devaluation of higher education, which is shown especially in the rules of attraction, has been a prominent concern since the public defunding of higher education in the 1980s. This defunding has sparked disputes over the commodification of higher education, which is especially the focus of works such as Tressie McMillan Cotum's Lower Ed, The Troubling Rise of For-Profit Colleges in the New Economy. Cotum's work highlights higher education's movement away from an institution which represents the desirable qualities of a nation towards the provision of a skilled labour force. However, the eruption of student protests in 2011 emphasised the challenge facing students as decreasing wages and increasing employment precarity await them after completing university. Contemporary campus novels illustrate the gravest concerns articulated in this scholarship. In these novels, students receive no education, illustrating the devaluation of higher education. Furthermore, students conclude these novels alienated and adrift. No secure role in society awaits them, like the students in higher education today. Campus novels also emphasize the university's role within a broader social context defined by oppression. As such, contemporary campus novels depict an American society dominated by anti-intellectualism, a pervasive attitude which has contributed to the damaging influence of fake news, increased lies and manipulation by political leaders, and uncertainty regarding social values. In addition, the universities in these novels are institutional representations of misogyny and white supremacy. In particular, then, these novels emphasize the need for initiatives to decolonize university curricula and works such as Craig Wilder's, which reveals higher education's contribution to and perpetuation of slavery. The restrained experiences of women in these novels emphasize the needs for initiatives such as Take Back the Night, and work which highlights the role of higher education in the perpetuation of gender inequality in America, such as the essays collected by Christine DeVelde and Andy Stepnick in this volume, Disrupting the Culture of Silence. The experiences of students in these campus novels emphasize that action and research such as this is required, not only to enable students to receive education and fulfilling social roles, but also to reassert the relevance and contribution of higher education in American society today. Thank you. Should I stop share?
Thank you very much, Philippa.
Thank you.
Very interesting. We've got a couple of questions that have come in, which maybe you'd like to address. We're due to go on coffee at 11:05. You'll have spotted that we're slightly beyond 11:05, but I'm sure we can take a couple of questions. So that's just fine. So we have a question from Len, who says this. So have universities in the West had their day, as these novels suggest, or do we just need to protect them from the barbarians of neoliberalism, as Bob might be suggesting?
I certainly think that universities' role needs to be reconsidered. I would prefer to see a detachment of universities' teaching and research functions from the provision from the skills that are required in companies in the private sector. I think that there are ways, for example, of shifting training and education provision into the private sector, that the private sector can take responsibility for that, which would free universities to focus on work which is more of the public good, essentially. But that would also certainly require more funding. But also new forms of standardization in the private sector and the education and the training which is provided there. So it would require a structural shift, but I do think the universities still have an important role to play as an idealized independent space.
Thank you, and I think it's a follow-on here from Ollie. Which I'll reframe the question slightly. He says, is the best, most challenging writing about universities not, or perhaps no longer, in fiction? So let's reframe the question slightly. So what do you think that kind of contemporary campus fiction can still add to the debate about the function of the university?
I mean, I think the good thing about fiction is that it works on a kind of symbolic level. And it's campus fiction especially is very much working against an idealization of the university, which was established in the earliest forms of the genre. And I think one of the problems that we have in the higher education sector today is that this symbolic, idealized version of the university weighs so heavily on us. And it prevents us from really engaging with the fundamental problems that we have in the mechanics of the university. So I think we still believe that the university is an independent space. We still believe that the university is a space for education and enlightenment. But that doesn't really engage with the realities of students in these universities today. So I think the campus fiction does have a role to play in that it very much takes these idealized ideas that we have about university spaces and just, gets rid of them completely. It just completely undermines them. And that's very much, I think, a wake-up call for some people who think that the university still operates on that level.
Well, thank you very much, Philippa.